Talking about the hiring of Dan Quinn, former head coach of the Atlanta Falcons, has been the defensive coordinator with the Cowboys. I think we're efforting his former boss, and Jason was helping me out. I've always thought his name was pronounced Dimitroff.
Okay.
And I was like throwing the I in there. I've seen him on TV before. Yeah. And
Mike Florio
pronounced it Dimitroff.
Yeah. He doesn't have that second I.
Yes,
so
that's how you pronounce it.
It's Dimitroff, yes.
Dimitroff, okay.
And Thomas Dimitroff worked with Belichick, Scott Pioli for many years as a director of college scouting in New England. And then, of course, in Atlanta, he was the GM for many years.
Right. From 08 to 2020.
Yeah, I mean, he was there for a long time.
Yep, had a long run.
JP put a picture of Dimitroff and Quinn, and Quinn just dwarfs him. You know, Dimitroff looks like a little, just like skinny guy.
Well, if you really want to
Quinn's this huge guy.
If you really want to see Quinn look massive, go look at the shot of him when he was at Salisbury.
Oh,
he's got the world's biggest shoulder pads on.
Yeah,
like the shoulder pads back when he was
big.
He was playing college football. It was a different era.
He's like, it's kind of Dan Campbell-ish. You know, Dan Campbell played tight end. I get it, but big dude.
All right, while we're waiting for Thomas, you want to take a couple calls real quick?
Sure.
Why don't we do that?
All right, let's go. Let me see here. Let's go to Mike in D.C. Mike, what's up, buddy? What do you think?
Terrible high, man. I'm from the era that you do not get anybody off the Cowboy staff.
Stupid.
That's a horrible idea. On your part.
Right. Stupid.
Wait a minute.
All right, go
Dumb.
ahead. Go ahead.
Wait a minute. That is an immature.
I want to hear this rationale.
This is it. That isn't. No, I'm going to say it's immature stance, but that's the era I come from. EB, I thought you were too. I expected you to rant, but you're not. And
No,
that's
because I
fine.
don't hate. I think it's good to take a guy from him. We'll get all the inside scoop on them. It'll help us scheme up against them.
You get to play him twice a year.
Yeah,
it's an
I think
advantage.
it's good.
Well, again, I thought you were from the era. I guess you were, because when you're from that era, you don't even take that into account. But
that was like back in the James Washington days
Mike,
when he came over here.
Mike, you don't
like that.
That's where I'm from.
I know, me too, but I've matured.
So, Mike, let me ask you this: you don't like the hire just because he's a former Cowboys coach. You don't think he's a bad coach. You just don't like him because he was a Cowboys coach.
No. I have a second point.
All right.
Now, if you want to look at it analytically, the man's a 500 coach.
Right.
They only smack us around and teams like us around. Every time they get to a juggernaut or a team that's decent, they get punched in the mouth. Just the Green Bay Packers. The fans will complain that the Green Bay Packers came in there laughing and whipping their behind and talking to them like, we don't care nothing about your defense. So they beat people like us downtrodden, but every time they play a good organization, they get punched in the mouth. If you want to look at it analytically about Dan Quinn.
Well, I look at his rankings, especially like the back-to-back years of number one ranked defenses in Seattle, and I understand
Did they win a Super Bowl when he was there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, EB, I just think, you know what? You're selfish. You just want your name back. That's all. You want your
That
EB
is
back.
true.
What they should have done.
I do want my name back, and I'm going to get it back.
Thank you for the call. So according,
I do want it back.
According to Mike's philosophy, if say CeeDee Lamb requested a trade to the Commanders for whatever reason, just wanted to come play for Dan Quinn, he would say, you know what, we don't want CeeDee Lamb on our team because he's a former Cowboy.
Well, you know, the joke
That's
was
just dumb.
I think somebody either he tweeted it or he told a reporter. Micah Parsons said, "I might go with him."
Right,
That's how much he likes him.
He loves
now
him.
he's obviously kidding or whatever, but
he's got a fair point about some of the good teams that Dallas played this year. But they did hold the Lions to 19. They beat the Lions 20-19. But they did get hammered by teams like San Francisco.
He's
but
proven his chops.
He has proven it.
You know, he's got a Super Bowl as a DC.
Yes. He took a team to a Super Bowl as a head coach.
Yeah, give me a break.
So you can focus on all the negatives, but there are positives. Yeah. I'm kind of surprised Cakes is flipping a little bit, too, because he was so
I'm willing to give the guy a chance.
Defensive coach,
I'm not just going to punt him away just because he's a defensive coach that has a record similar that smacks kind of Ron Rivera's record. I know there are other factors at play here.
Rivera's was actually better.
I think he's better than Rivera by far. He's involved. He's emotionally involved.
Yeah.
I'm just
he's been innovative.
Though.
Not here.
I know you're scarred by what happened here.
Right.
But when he was hired, that was his reputation.
I don't think that my guess is, and I'm willing to bet on it, that he doesn't go into a shell and just becomes an arms folded guy.
I don't think so. But we have his former boss, who's now with Sumer Sports, former two-time NFL Executive of the Year. He is the CEO of Sumer Sports. They bring the best analysis to the most popular sport in America, Sumersports.com. It is Thomas Dimitroff. Hey, Thomas.
Gentlemen, how you doing?
Doing great.
We're
Thanks for
doing
coming on the
okay.
show.
Thank you.
We're having you on to learn about Dan Quinn. You obviously worked with him for many, many years. Talk about what that run was like for you, what you learned about him along the way.
Look, you guys are getting I think a fantastic coach. I'm so happy that he's back at the helm. I mean, I was thinking the last few years that he's been, kind of trying to figure out the right place to go because he brings unbelievable passion, unbelievable. He's that kind of guy that's just a combination of really intuitive and bright, communicative guy, really gregarious. You guys will love him in the media as well. The fan base will love him. The players, I don't know how many people I've talked to, players who have said they have never played for a coach that they've wanted to play for more than Dan. So it's a combination of learning, of course, what he learned when he was with us during those years, and then coming back into that second time around, which I think is going to be fantastic for him.
Thomas, take us back in time a little bit. Put us in the room with you when you interviewed Dan Quinn. What was it about him that jumped out at you that made you say, this is our guy? You went back to Arthur Blank and said, this is going to be the guy to lead the Falcons.
And who else were you interviewing? I'm curious back then.
Well, look, back then we were interviewing, Josh McDaniel was up there, and you remember when Dan was out during that time, I mean, he was the hot commodity. And we knew, and Arthur Blank, Arthur, I mean, from it being around the league and watching, I mean, he's the guy that's going to go after his man. So when we were interviewing Dan, again, he didn't miss a beat. He was one of those guys that was just, again, look you in the eye, because I'm a big believer in, yes, there's a lot of people out there, you want an offensive coordinator, but I would say to anyone, you get the leader, you get the person that's going to have the room, both offense and defense, is what Dan was as well, right? Sometimes coaches sway towards the side of the ball that they're, obviously their background is, but Dan's the guy that gets the entire group, and that's something that was really, really impressive with him. And again, Arthur, knowing that he was the guy, we went, and I have no problem talking about this. I mean, when we had Mike Smith in Atlanta. In the NFL, it's called 53. You guys know what that is, right? Final football say. We wanted Dan so much that for a first-time coach, we were given 53. I was turning over 53 to a first-time head coach. That's how much we believed in him.
Thomas, so a lot of the skeptics here in Washington are looking at his total record in Atlanta, okay? And I'm a pro Dan Quinn guy. Okay, we went to the same college. I actually used to interview him on my college radio show at Salisbury State back in the day. But
yes.
Let me ask you this though: we have skeptics. A lot of fans are skeptics because of his total record in Atlanta. And I say, look, in the history of the Super Bowls, 65 coaches have taken their teams to Super Bowls. He's one of them. All right, out of all the coaches that have ever coached in the NFL, and it's hundreds, he's one of them. But what happened towards the end of Dan's run there when you were there as the GM those last 3 years? Why was he fired when you guys went 0-5 in his 6th year? What happened to the team?
Well, remember, there are certain teams out there and owners out there who, think longevity a lot more than Arthur Blank. And again, that's not a dig in any way. Arthur is a competitive football and businessman, right? I mean, that's what he believes in, wins. And it was the same way with our group before, the regime before with Mike Smith. I mean, we did some really, really good things. Again, Mike Smith won Coach of the Year 3 out of 5 years, and then we had 2 years, and then Mike was fired. So just keep that in perspective. Dan, again, we did a lot of really good things. And even beyond, everyone should know this, even beyond that 16 run where we get to the Super Bowl, we have that unfortunate loss, and it still gnaws at everyone, right? He came back in 17 and got too deep into the playoff. And quite honestly, it coulda, shoulda, woulda, right? But we get there. If that game would have went just a little different against Philadelphia, we would have had a chance, I think, to make another run back in. So my point is that's very rare. A lot of times coaches don't bring their people back they don't even get into the playoffs. They have like a horrible year the year after they lose the Super Bowl. Dan's a guy that keeps everyone rallied, right? That last year, we just had a run of a year plus, a year and a half, and it was just unfortunate. We had some mistakes on different parts of the game, some special teams mistakes. And again, remember, I mean, Arthur is about wins, Arthur Blank, and then ultimately we just decided that, well, he decided it was both of us. Remember, Arthur brought both Dan and I into his house after a quarter of the season and just said it was time. And that's kind of that's a strong approach from a businessman who believes in what he wants. And it's unfortunate. He told me recently as they were looking for other coaches, Arthur Blank did, he's like, look, I have such respect for Dan after having spent the time I have and interviewing more and more coaches. You realize what you have in the guy that you do have. So keep that in perspective, I guess.
What do you think from afar, and I assume you and Dan are still close, what do you think he's learned in those years since?
Yeah, we are close, and it's interesting because I think Dan looks at the 3, 4, or 5 things that he looks at that needed to change. Like anyone, right? Any head coach will sit back and they'll.
Can you
look
give
at
examples?
Yeah, look, I think there are times when we, and this is both of us, there are a lot of these things I take together, right? I mean, I'm a big believer in the NFL and in that unbelievably important part of the communication between a general manager and the head coach. That relationship's massively important, along with the head coach and the quarterback relationship. Dan had really good relationships with the players, as we did. We went a little too far with a guy like Julio Jones, right? So I think that's one of the things that he learns. Like, look, there's a time and a place for being the player guy, which he always was, and he'll never change that. But I think there's a place where you realize that you have to either move on from a player or not, be how does this sound? Be overly empathetic towards that player because and your coaching staff, right? I think those are things that people learn as they go through their career as a head coach. And I would as a GM, and I know Dan would as a head coach, knowing like, hey, there are times when you have to get into people, and there are times when you have to potentially move on from people. And to Dan's credit, Dan is not one of those guys that's going to stay with let's say a position coach or a coordinator too long. If he sees it's not working, I mean, he's got the stuff about him to make moves along the way and move on. So those are the things I think he learned along the way.
All right, so you're the CEO of SumerSports.com now, and I want you to kind of give me your analytical take on what Dan Quinn is walking into. The Commanders with Ron Rivera had a very disappointing year this season. Is this a team that is bereft of talent? How do you see it? Now, they do have cap space. They do have the number 2 pick. What should we expect here moving forward?
Well, look, I can't comment too deeply on your team. I know I have a solid understanding of what you guys did last year and what was needed. Look, as we all are, a big believer in where you're going at the helm at the quarterback spot. Mm-hmm. You guys are in a spot where you're going to bring in a head coach who understands about being around. I think a very good quarterback in Matt Ryan has a really good understanding of the offense. And the other thing is really, really important to understand. Dan is a personnel and an evaluation aficionado as a head coach. A lot of times those guys aren't like that, right? They kind of sit back and they let their GM, Adam Peters, they let people do their thing. Dan's going to come in and want to be really involved in that way, in a really good way, gentlemen. He's going to have his prints on everything, again, in a good, productive, and communicative way with that GM. So coming in to look at what needs to be done, Dan is going to – he's not just going to be sitting back there with his legs kicked up working on the playbook. He will be, but that is something to be known about Dan. I mean, when he got into our place, man, he spent so much time learning about all the other positions on the field and the offensive side. So as good as he is as a defensive coordinator, he has a really good grasp of what is needed on an offense and what he wants in an offense. That's what I would say more than trying to evaluate your football team. Rest assured, he and Adam are going to be working really well side by. I don't think there's another head coach in there that's going to be understanding of the GM's role and working with them together, not in any sort of a power struggle way. He is really good that way, and that's vital in the NFL.
Yeah, we want to ask you about the Adam Peters hire too, but before that, you talked about your time as GM and in the interviewing process, you decided on Dan Quinn, a defensive guy. And all the stats are saying now, we just ran through a bunch of them previously, all the stats are saying that teams with offensive-minded head coaches are doing better now. And I know the league has changed, since you were there in 2015. But do you think the thought of hiring an offensive-minded head coach is overblown versus a defensive guy now? You think it's kind of I don't know. I mean, is it more valuable to hire an offensive head coach in your mind than a defensive guy?
Well, look, I get the idea and the concept of it. If you have a young quarterback and you want to make sure that you're producing on offense, we all understand how important that is. But I would never make that decision to hire an offensive-minded head coach who wasn't a leader, right? In lieu of leadership and saying, like, look, I'm just going to have this young offensive coordinator, and quite honestly, he's going to sit in his office more than he should. Look, I've seen that time and again, not just on that side, but, I mean, I have seen it, and I think it's important to step back and take a macro view on how you're hiring your head coach. And if that guy's going to have an ability to understand both sides of the ball, and look, I mean, there are so many benefits of having an acutely aware defensive coordinator who knows what kicks his butt over the years. I think Dan has a really good feel for that. And I think there are some really good D coordinators out there who do. Yes, I understand the benefit of an offensive-minded, quarterback sort of centric head coach. But that, to me, only goes so far. And I just think Dan brings a well-rounded side. And I think it goes against the idea that, look, they did what they did down in Atlanta, Raheem Morris recently. And their thought there is the same idea. Let's get a guy in here who has the leadership ability to be at the helm and bring the team together more than it has been in the past.
Thomas, you have crossed career paths with new Commanders GM Adam Peters. You were both in New England in the early 2000s. Give us your impressions of him and how you think he's going to fare here in D.C. as the big boss.
Man, you're making me feel old. I look at all these GMs that are getting their jobs now, and I'm thinking, wow, was I that many years older than them? Adam is, Adam, when he spent time with us in New England, you knew right away that he had a long range plan to sit at the big spot, and he's had an opportunity to be around a lot of really talented football men. He's not one of those guys who just got the job and got lucky, and that is one of the things that's a little bit of an agitation for me in the NFL right now. Sometimes guys just kind of squeeze in here and there. I mean, he was around the Patriot paradigm during those times when we were making a big run and being around, Bill Belichick and Scott Pioli, who are very well known. Of course, we all know big football men. Then he moves over to Denver and spends time with, when John Elway was there. And honestly, you got a chance to see all of the good and the challenging spots of New England, as well as being there in Denver around some of the quarterback stuff. As good as John Elway is as a football man, seeing some of what was going on there. Then he goes and spends fantastic time with really good football people out in San Francisco. He's a guy that's going to come in, and he has a really good eye, by the way, back to that, which is what you want from your general manager. And I think he understands the importance of really molding and communicating with that head coach, and that relationship being as important as it is. Again, he's not a fly off the handle guy. To me, I think he's really grown into being a really, focused, aware person in football. And I've had some good conversations with him before. Understands football really well. Played football himself, of course, at a higher level. UCLA guy. So he's just a well-rounded individual. Comes in in my mind, the perfect age after having such experiences around the league.
Thomas, we're loving talking to you. You don't have to say yes, but we have to pay the bills. Could we bring you back for a second segment?
We'll make
your brain
shorter.
a little more.
5 or 10 minutes.
You guys can bring me back anytime. I look forward to it. And
How about like hold on for 5 minutes?
No, we mean it for the next segment.
Yeah, is that okay? I got a couple more questions.
I got to get my daughter to school, but you guys can bring me back. Let me work on this.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Talk to our
Thank
producer.
you, buddy. Thank
We're
you.
talking to the former two-time NFL Executive of the Year, who was the GM in Atlanta.
He's really
with
good.
Dan Quinn as his head coach.
Is he selling you on him a little bit more?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm not I'm open to him being successful. So we'll talk to Thomas Dimitroff next. I wanted to ask you about Belichick, Thomas. How surprised are you? There were 8 jobs open. Now, I guess you can't count New England, but let's say 7 jobs open and he doesn't get a gig. What do you expect to happen for Belichick in the next year or two?
I have to say, I am floored. I looked at that group of head coaches this year, and I was extremely excited as I was tracking it for a number of reasons. Just not only the business I'm involved with right now, in Sumer Sports, but also the coaches out there. I thought there were some very, very good coaches with unbelievable experience, a couple young ones that you guys are even potentially looking at in Washington. And my feeling was there is never and will never be an opportunity for a group of owners and general managers to have an opportunity to hire a head coach like Bill Belichick. It's unbelievable, almost unfathomable in my mind that he did not get picked up. And it was kind of the way things were falling. I really do believe that. I think personally, as much people can have whatever thoughts they have about him at any level, about not talking to the media as well as the way that they want him to. There is not a coach out there in my mind in the next 3 to 4 years that can bring your organization closer to a Super Bowl than Bill Belichick. And again, the fact that it's a once in a generation move and not done is really tough for me to understand.
Well, I wanted to touch kind of on that. Now that we have gone in the Quinn direction, I assume Belichick's not going to take like a D coordinator job, right? He's going to wait and figure out his next spot. Who can we expect some names that you're familiar with and that you would recommend he add to his staff? You talk about some younger guys offensively. Everybody around here is infatuated and in love with a young guy offensively. Give us some sexy names.
You're talking about coordinators?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Or any position,
wow.
really.
Yeah, look, I wish I could get. I'm going to have to. You're catching me off guard that way on the young names. I don't want to just start listing. I mean, I've been around some really good young football coaches.
Well, do you know these Kubiaks? Do you know the young kids? Them?
I know some of them. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's amazing. As we said earlier, you start seeing some of these guys. Their dads were around when I was doing what I was doing, of course. So there are a lot of young ones. Sorry, I can't just start listing these guys off right now for you because I really don't know where some of these kids are right now, where they are with their deals. As you know, that's heavy in the league right now, making sure that you're approaching it that way. If you start popping some names out to me, that might be a little bit better.
What about guys that he's worked with?
Yeah, but we know he has the ability to put together an amazing staff. And just in that 2016 Falcons team,
Chip Kelly's somebody.
Shanahan was there. Both LaFleurs were there. Mike McDaniel was there. Raheem Morris, who just got rehired by the Falcons, they were on that staff. So he can put that together.
Well, and that's what I'm ultimately saying. I'm thinking about that group. They're all landing big jobs for the most part, right? I'm a big fan of Mike LaFleur. I know things worked the way they did, and it wasn't, it was tough at the Jets for a bit, and then he goes and resurfaces. But that whole group, with what I thought Dan brought to the table back to putting together a good staff, which to me is probably more of an important. He's a realist when he comes in to interview and talk about who he's going to have. A lot of head coaches come in, and you guys all need to understand this. They start throwing out a whole bunch of garbage on the wall, and they have about a 2% chance of landing like even a half of that group. They think that it's going to win them over in the interview, and the owner's going to be, flipping around thinking that's amazing. But then if you have a smart general manager, as you guys do, they realize the probability of it, and it works against them. So I think a guy like Dan will understand who he can potentially bring in, and he's going to understand how important it is that those coaches also work with the personnel department well and the general manager. Remember that. That is vital in this league. And that's why, in my mind, you get a first-time general manager in Adam Peters who has a great deal of experience along the way. They want to come into their first time at the general manager spot with the right head coach that they know are going to work together on everything. This is vital. That's why, and I'm not speaking out of both sides of my mouth. You look at a guy like Bill Belichick who would come in, and he deserves it. He would have full control of everything, even if there were to be a general manager in the office. That's what it is. With Adam, he's going to come in. He knows he's going to have a partner who is going to respect everything he believes along the way, and they're going to work together on it. It is so important. You've seen it around the league years and years. I mean, I remember all the way back to when Marty Schottenheimer and A.J. Smith were out at the San Diego Chargers. Two great football men. They were at loggerheads from day one. It's not that you don't want disagreements among your head coach and your general manager. You want to be able to go into the room alone together and talk about the team at so many levels and come out with a unified opinion. And you don't want to be, siloing where your coaching staff is over here and your personnel and management staff is over here. There's no way to make a successful team and franchise in my mind. I think they're very smart about how they put that together. And I'm getting off topic a little bit from what you guys talked about, but it's vital when you start putting together both staffs that they interact very well. And I can go into that a little bit more. Suffice it to say, coaching staffs and the scouting staffs work together in both of these guys' worlds. I'm talking about in Adams and Matt and Dan Quinn's, where they when they're preparing for free agency and when they're preparing for the draft, they usually section out a scout or a personnel man with one of the position coaches, and they work together through the off season and really hone in on a position after the scouts are off the road in their own normal, across the country. It's a really good way to approach building the team.
Joined by Thomas Dimitroff, former two-time NFL Executive of the Year, was Dan Quinn's boss in Atlanta when he was GM there. Now he's the CEO of Sumer Sports. Check him out at sumersports.com. You said throw out a name. I'm going to throw one that's been rumored, apparently interviewed for the Raiders offensive coordinator job, Chip Kelly. Did you cross paths with Chip Kelly, and do you think that's a possible fit here as an OC in Washington if he chooses to leave college?
Look, I think Chip is really smart as an offensive coordinator. I mean, of course, things didn't work out in Philly as a head coach. But look, I think the same thing about Josh McDaniel. I mean, unfortunately, I think Josh is the closest thing out there, and I think Chip is very close. And I don't throw genius out. I don't like doing that. I think it's completely overblown. But these two men are the closest to being experts in that area more than any that I've been around. And I think Chip has a great ability to come back out after being around, how long has he been at UCLA right now? I'm trying to think.
I want to say 4 seasons.
3 or 4 years, I think, yeah.
One of the things about bringing a college guy in who has a really good understanding of pro, which is what he does, is they have a really good grasp of the recruiting class, right? When Dan came in, Dan was around the college scene before he came back into the NFL, and we really thrived with his understanding and knowledge of the players out there through all of their recruiting. And that's a big thing, right? Beyond the talent. We're not worried about looking at the talent of these players coming out of college as much as we need to know that we have a tap in to the personality, their character, their intelligence, their football awareness. And I think a guy like Chip not only brings the idea of all the really smart scheming, which is what you want to need, but also the idea that he is still tapped into the college scene, which can be helpful in putting together the football team.
Getting to that, again, I'm not trying to catch you off guard. I'm not expecting you to have, exceptional opinions on some of these guys. But what about any of the young quarterbacks jump out at you? They got the number 2 overall pick. I'll say this. One of these guys is put in there like FU Notre Dame on his fingernails, and he's already demanded he doesn't want to be, in Chicago. He might be on my FUBAR list.
I do. I mean, look, I have spent some time looking at these guys. Of course, we see a lot of the different data that's coming along, and look, I think this is a great place to be looking for a quarterback. We know Jaden Daniels. We know Drake May. You're talking about someone that, I mean, you don't want to mention his name. Is that where you're going?
No, you can, of course. Caleb
Williams.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I mean, that's a really good group of 4 or 5 guys that I think can come into a team and really make a run on it. Now, look, quarterbacks, we know the data on that. I mean, there are a lot of misses along the way. And again, I mentioned this a little bit earlier. Having a head coach coming in who has an understanding of the ups and downs of the quarterback situation. Dan was very fortunate to come in, and one of the reasons why he probably chose Atlanta when Matt Ryan was rolling back in the day. I mean, now he's in a spot. I mean, you have a tough-ass guy at the quarterback spot. Love what he does in a lot of ways. This gives him an opportunity to come in and know what you have and what's out there in the young world of what we're alluding to with these 3, 4, or 5 guys. And I think it really sets up well for the team. Obviously, they're not going to go in the free agency market. It's not a real strong free agency market. Kirk Cousins. I mean, that was a big rumor down here in Atlanta that Kirk was going to come in here along with having a young guy in the draft, and then you could really develop. I don't think that's your approach there, because obviously you already have a quarterback there who's making his way. Not saying he's fully established, but obviously he has done some good things along the way. So pair the young guys with someone like that they can learn from, I think, is vital. I'm sorry, I'm in the middle of a carpool lane, and I have all these Buckhead ladies cussing.
All right,
at
we'll
me.
let you go.
We'll let you go.
We'll let you go.
Let's go. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you very, very much.
Thanks for the time.
Anytime, guys. We'll talk soon.
Yeah,
All right.
man, you've been more than gracious with your time.
Dropping
Yeah,
off the
thank
start
you.
at
Very
school.
nice.
Yeah, that's
Some
awesome.
good insight.
He gave you a lot of stuff. I mean, we had him on for 40 minutes. He gave you a lot of good stuff.
Kids in school, Buckhead. Buckhead, kind of fancy.
Big
and
cash.
ritzy.
Yeah. That's where Mike Bray lives.
He's a GM for many, many years.
No, I know he's doing well. Trust me. I'm well aware.
All right, we'll come back, open up the phone lines again, because we barely took any calls on your reaction to Dan Quinn being named the head coach of the Washington Commanders. You just heard from his former boss, the GM of the Atlanta Falcons, two-time NFL Executive of the Year, Thomas Dimitroff. So thanks to Thomas for joining us. We'll take some of your calls next.